Now let's take a look at ZModeler. ZModeler is a polygon modeling toolset that's available in Zbrush, and we access it by first of all having a default model open. I'm going to open up a polymesh star, draw it on the canvas, and go into edit mode. Now, the best way I find to start a model in ZModeler is to go to the initialize menu and then create a Q-cube. It's just a quick cube. If we do that and go into frame mode, you'll see what we have is a 4x4 cube with a different polygroup for each side. Now we access ZModeler by going to B for brush, Z for ZModeler, and just selecting the ZModeler brush. So it says that it performs best when dynamic draw size is activated, so just click OK and it'll automatically activate that. Now you'll see that this is contextual. When I mouse over a face, it lights up a face and says we're going to Q mesh a poly. If we select an edge, we're on edge functions, and points, we're on point functions. Now, this is in the brush menu, but it doesn't really behave like a brush. It's more akin to polymodeling. It's more like extruding and cutting edges, things that you'd find in other programs. But even that, it's a little bit different. It's a very unique method of working. So it's all contextual. If I mouse over a face, if I press the space bar, it'll open up the ZModeler menu. Now this is set up into a multiple set of windows. The first window will always be your actions. So this is polygon actions, as you can see. If I were on an edge and I press the space bar, this would be edge actions. So this is all contextual. So first we have our polygon actions. So we're going to use QMesh. QMesh is just sort of like a catch-all extruding and welding tool. It's just really good for quick mesh editing. Next, we have the target. Right now it's set to a single poly, so if I click and drag, it's only going to affect a single polygon. However, if I change this to polygroup island, it will find every polygroup that's the same, that's touching this face, and then it will affect that polygroup island. If we do polygroup all, it'll affect everything that is in that particular polygroup, so you see it's affecting the opposite side, which shares that polygroup. And if we do, for example, polyloop, you'll see that there's this orange line there. I can determine the loop of faces I'm going to affect by the direction of that line, click and drag, and then that affects those faces. Now if I go to an edge here, hit the space bar, you see that I can insert an edge loop here. So if I click and drag, I can insert an edge loop. And if I go back here and then change my options, I have the ability to bevel. Now I have targets and modifiers down here. All these menus will have other menus associated with them. For example, QMesh, we have alignments, and then we have further modifiers here. If I go to edge, go to bevel, I can set it to edge loop complete, edge loop partial, polyloop. We're going to do a single row linear edge for edge loop complete, and I will just click and drag, and that bevels that edge. Now if we go to a point and hit spacebar, we can move that point. So if I just click and drag, I'm moving the point. We can, say for example, delete a point, or we can QMesh. So here if I grab that point and then drag, you see what we're doing is we're basically splitting it off, and it's welding that point to that edge. So it's a very robust modeling tool set, and it's an unusual workflow. I found when I started using it, I found it a little bit difficult to get accustomed to it. But once I really got the handle of the spacebar and the polygroup selections, polygroup island, for example, is the one I tend to use the most, I found it became quite easy and quick to use this. So let's give it a go. Let's see what we can create here. I'm going to go ahead and select polygroup all for QMesh, and let's create a dagger here. I'm going to just go ahead and extrude these out a couple times. We're going to create the handle here. Now, as I'm working, I want to see my mesh smoothed. ZModeler doesn't work on a model that has multiple subdivision levels. So what are we to do? That's why we have under geometry dynamic subdivisions. Now the hotkey for dynamic subdivisions is going to be D as long as you don't have any existing subdivision levels. Now this is important. This is something that catches people out a lot. Do not add subdivision levels once you're in dynamic subdivision level mode, because that will slow down your ZBrush interactivity. My students in my online class, I'm constantly finding that they are accidentally enabling dynamic subdivision levels and then dividing on top of it, and they don't understand why their brushes then become very slow. So be very aware of that. In ZBrush 2019, they added this menu or this pop-up window just to warn you that you're entering dynamic subdivision levels. So we're going to say yes, and now you can see we've got a smoothed version of our model, but it's a dynamic subdivision. If I press Shift D, we exit it, and we press D, we enter it again. Now here we've got Q grid. That's quick grid based subdivision. If I turn this up to 2, that's going to change the look of my mesh. We can add bevels, chamfers, and coverage here. You can see the smoothing of that. Now what this is analogous to having a polymesh cube, for example. So we have a polymesh cube here. If we were to divide this, under normal circumstances, we're going to lose the hard edges of that cube. However, if we turn off the smooth modifier, the SMT modifier, add a division, and then turn it back on, and then further divide, it will maintain the volumes of those edges and kind of keep that hard surface quality. So what we're getting here when we change our Q-grid mode to 1, we're getting that same type of effect. It's looking like we have smoothed with the SMT modifier turned off. So it's very, very good for hard surface. We can adjust our flat subdivision levels as well. And you see the different types of volumes that we get with that. It more accurately will represent that cubic form. Now, if I click apply, what this is going to do is it's going to, so if I turn that up to 1, that gives me 2 subdivision levels. And actually, no, that's flat subdivision levels, pardon me. Flat subdivision levels are as if we are dividing with the SMT modifier turned off. Smooth subdivision levels are just like we're adding smooth subdivision levels. If I click apply, it will now apply that, and now I've got a model with 3 subdivision levels that represents that shape that we just saw. So let's go ahead and create, well, let's turn down flat. Let's go ahead and create a dagger here. So now that we've got dynamic subdivision levels turned on, let's go ahead and let's extrude this poly loop. Or actually, let's do this. Let's do a quick polygroup. So I want to extrude this whole section out here. I want to make a pommel. So what I'll do is I'm going to alt-click on these faces. Let's turn on our X symmetry. I'm going to alt-click on these faces, and what this does is it creates a temporary polygroup. So now I have polygrouped all of these, and I'll just do QMesh, polygroup island, click and drag, and that's going to give us a nice nice extrusion of just those faces. So let's do that again. I'm going to alt-click to make a temporary polygroup for these selections, and then we're just going to QMesh that again, and we'll do a one for the bottom here and just pull that out. So we're creating a pommel for that handle. So let's grab, let's say, these faces here, and I'll grab these faces here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mouse over a face, press the space bar, and I'm going to click Inset. Now in the options, I want to inset the region rather than each poly. If I do each poly, it does this. If I do the region, it will create a nice extrusion pattern there. And we'll do it again. Oops. Make another polygroup selection here. And then we'll do it again. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to QMesh, polygroup island, and watch this. If I QMesh this out, it extrudes it normally. However, because this polygon topology matches this topology, if I take this and then QMesh extrude it all the way in, as soon as it meets the other edge, it will cut a hole there and then weld those faces. So let's go ahead now and let's make the crossbar. So let's go ahead and alt-click these. We'll do QMesh, polygroup island, and let's extrude that up. And then we'll select these and extrude these out. There we go. Now I'm going to make a temporary polygroup selection here, and let's do another inset. Let's go ahead and grab these as well. Let's do an inset. And we will do polygroup island. And let's do inset region, center only. Oops, no. Inset region, pardon me. And center and border. There we go. So that's going to give us a nice area to extrude the blade. Now I'm going to set my Q mesh to polygroup island, and we're just going to extrude this blade out. Bring that all the way up. You know what I might do is just save myself some trouble, and let's just go ahead and extrude these like this. So we make sure that we have edge loops going along the length of the blade. Now I want to scale. So let's go ahead and select these faces, and we'll do scale. And we'll do polygroup island. And we can set it to mesh center, axis center, or local symmetry. So I believe we want to do local symmetry. So yeah, there we go. We want to scale that down like that using local symmetry. And then we will just do our selection once more. Alt click on those faces, go to Q mesh, polygroup island, and then we will extrude that out. Great. Now I'm going to go over here and I'm going to mouse over an edge and just click and drag. Oops. Mouse over an edge. Make sure I'm on insert, and I'm going to click and drag to add an edge loop here that's just going to sharpen that delineation between the blade and the handle. Now I will find it easier just to go and just leave the ZModeler menu. And what I will do is I am going to isolate just these faces. Let's do Shift D. Let's step out of our ZModeler menu here. I'm going to isolate just these faces, mask that, go to transpose. Let's move our pivot here, and I'm just going to scale the blade down like that. I find it just a bit easier to do it that way. There we go. And I kind of want to get this bit here, so let's go ahead and isolate that. And we're going to hide these faces here. And we're going to hide these faces here. There we go. And hide these faces here. Now we can really get that scaled down. Let's mask these so we're not affecting them, and we'll just move that pivot over here and just scale that down. There we go. Reveal everything again, and there we go. So we ended up with a little happy accident there actually, but I'm going to undo that. I don't quite like what that did. There we go. All right, so I am going to zoom in here, and I'm going to select these. I'm going to go back to ZModeler, B for brush, Z for ZModeler, select ZModeler, and I'm going to select this edge, and I'm going to go to move. And we'll just move this edge. So make sure that we can see what our selection is. All right. There. Let's move that up. Oops. Sometimes it could be a little tricky to grab an edge. There we go. Moving that edge down. We'll grab that point. Make sure that we're on move, and we'll move that point down. Grab this edge. Move this down. Move this up. And then move this point up. Oops. Again, you got to be careful about your selections. There we go. Press the D key. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Q mesh. Actually, I'm going to do a polygroup, polyloop, and I'm going to click here, and that's going to add a polygroup for that polyloop of faces. Now I'm going to go to Q mesh, set it to polyloop, and I'm going to Q mesh extrude that in to give a nice little crossbar there. Now I want to sharpen that delineation along that edge, so let's zoom in. We'll go to our edge and make sure that we are in our insert. Don't confuse it with inset. And let's leave this mode here, and I'm just going to go ahead and place these edges here and then re-enter. There we go. That's more along the lines of what I'm looking for. Now, you can sharpen the edges of things like this by just adding an extra edge loop like you would when you're normally polymodeling. You can also, if you select an edge, you can select crease. You can set crease to edge loop complete, and then if I click that edge loop, it's going to crease. Oops, make sure that we capture the, no, we got to capture the edge. There we go. We can crease that edge, effectively flattening it, like so. So if we come over here, we'll do the same thing there, like so. So I'm going to undo those. And I think I might go ahead and crease this edge right there. So that gives us a nice little delineation there. Now I want to take this handle and I want to reduce the handle so it's not quite so thick. So I'm going to do polygroup, set it to polyloop, and we're going to click additive. So let's go ahead and click this, oops. Nope, there we go. I want to actually select this, so we're going to shift click that, click, press shift. I'm trying to select this polygroup here, so polyloop, alt will create a new one, but I'm just going to press shift after I select it, or after I click it, and I'm hoping, there we go, that will pick up that polygroup. Let's go to overwrite, there we go, and that should overwrite that. There we go. So I've now overwritten that polygroup. So the problem was I needed to make sure that I had overwrite turned on because it was just adding polygroups there. So here I've got a polygroup island now for that loop, and it looks like those are actually just slightly a different color. Those weren't quite the right polygroup. All right, so I'm going to do polygroup island, Q mesh, and let's Q mesh this in, making that handle a little bit slimmer. There we go. All right. Now we want to address the tip of the sword here. I'm going to Shift D to step out of the dynamic subdivision mode, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I'm going to mouse over this face, and I'm going to set the face action to bridge 2 polys. So I'll select this poly first. You see the tooltip says bridge 2 polys. Click first poly, and then I'll click the second poly here, and that creates a nice little bridge there. And we'll do the same thing here, and this will give us a nice point there. Very cool. And now I'm just going to go ahead and mask that point at the very, very tip of the sword. Go to transpose move. Let's just alt click and drag to bring that gizmo up, and then we're just going to move that point nicely there. Clear the mask, and then we'll enter into our dynamic subdivision levels again, and we've got a nice blade. So there we go. Now ZModeler has all sorts of different capabilities that I encourage you to explore. Beyond just sort of the most commonly used ones that we've just seen, as you dig into the interface more and more, you'll find there's all sorts of stuff that you can actually do. So for example, something we can do here is if we go back to ZModeler, and if we just do a quick selection, or a quick polygroup. So we're going to select these faces. We're actually going to make it 2 faces. And then we're going to zoom in here, and we're going to do a selection of these 2 faces. Now we're going to go to delete, and we will do polygroup all. Click those faces, and then that deletes those 2 temporary polygroups. Now we'll just Shift D to exit out of the smooth view. We mouse over an edge and go to bridge, 2 holes. We can set it to spline, circle, or arcs. We have the option to do interactive curvature or interactive resolution. That allows you to change those as you draw them. Now there's optimal optimal curvature and optimal resolution, which is what we'll just start with. It gives you the best possible curve between those two holes when they're bridged. So let's take a look. We're going to go ahead and click the first edge. The first hole, we click an edge, and then we're going to zoom in and we'll click an edge here. Now we need to be careful because it's a very small hole there, so you need to make sure that we actually get the edge on the hole. So let's go ahead and select that. And that's our first hole, and now we'll rotate around, come back down to the larger hole, and then click that edge. That's our second hole, and now it bridges those two spaces. And it creates this really nice kind of hand guard. So I can also undo that, and let's say we want to put it in a different place. So we'll undo all the way back to our poly grouping. And let's do it on this side here. I will create a temporary poly group here and here. And then we'll delete those. Same process, just delete poly group all. And we'll do it on the other side as well. Grab those two faces and those two faces and then delete them. Now we're going to bridge those holes, so I'm going to select the edge, bridge two holes. We'll set it to spline this time though, so we'll click the first edge and then we'll click the second edge. And you see the type of arc that we get from that. So we undo that, and let's make the interactive work. So we'll select interactive curvature, and we'll click the first edge, then the second edge. Oops, got the wrong one. You have to be very careful if you've got two edges really close together. Get the first edge. There we go. Now, as I move my cursor, it changes that curvature. So that's the interactive curvature. It can be a little tricky. You have to make sure that you're always clicking on the correct edge. As you saw, if you've got two edges close together, it can be easy to get the wrong one, and then it won't actually create the bridge. And you can do interactive curvature and interactive resolution. We can change our poly grouping. We can change to poly group rows or poly group flat. So if we undo that and do it again, very carefully get in here and grab that edge, click and drag. You see that gives us a nice unified poly group just for that new part. So I'm going to go ahead now and do a poly group by poly loop. Let's go ahead and get a new poly group here. I'm going to click that and then hold Shift. There we go, undo that, and grab that poly group. Oops. Click and Shift. It's a little tricky combination there. There we go. Now I want to click and poly group these, and I'm using the poly loop option. And I wanted to select a poly loop group that's not touching this particular section that I want to manipulate. So that's why I chose the yellow poly group, because there's no other yellow poly group touching it. So we go to QMesh. We'll do poly group island. If I click and drag, you see that we can start to scale that and adjust it. Now watch what happens as I expand it. It tries to sort of weld to the other vertices as it comes in contact with them down at the lower end. So be aware that that is something that it does try and do. So I'm actually going to limit this poly group. I'm going to grab this poly group here, and I'm going to get rid of these bits here. Make sure I'm on poly group. There we go. And poly group this. There we go. We'll poly group that. And now we'll do QMesh on this section here. So we can create a little step in that, just a little bit more detail, a little bit more nuance. Don't overdo it though, like that though, and then you're going to end up. There we go. You press the D key, and now we can see the impact that that has. Now, if I wanted to do something similar to the other side, I can do that just by going back to my edges and make sure that we're on bridge, and we can use polygroup rows this time. And we'll click our first edge. We have to zoom in because there's two edges very close together. So we get our first hole. Now it wants us to click our second hole, so we'll zoom out and very carefully zoom in and get the correct edge, and then click and drag with our interactive curvature. Now this time you see it actually does alternating polygrouping. So I can do my my Q mesh for polygroup all, and we click and drag, and it actually extrudes out those alternating polygroups, giving us this interesting pattern, especially once we go into dynamic smooth. So if I actually want to create an object from this, I go to my dynamic subdivisions and click apply, and now I've got an actual object with subdivision levels. So you see that it's got those 3 subdivision levels now applied. So that is ZModeler. Hopefully you found this interesting and helpful, and you see different ways that you can use this in your own workflows. ZModeler is more than just polymodeling inside of Zbrush. I use it often when I have to create props or a bit of costume or kit. I use it more often than I go to Maya in many cases. But it's also useful in other ways. For example, if you use the topology brush, which we talk about in a separate video, if you create a polygon shell, you can then create a thickness to that using QMesh. So it's good for creating costume elements and thickness and from poly shells for armor and shields. So there's more ways that you can use it than just creating a base mesh inside of ZModeler. So hopefully you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in the next lesson.